Hello, everybody. My name is Lloyd Stokes. This is Sourced Presents. Sourced Presents is a podcast now. We actually relaunched. This is our seventh episode. And Sourced Presents was something that was designed by our business a couple of years ago. What we wanted to do was we wanted to interview people that were in the software, SaaS, predominantly kind of sales side world, and had experiences of working within early stage businesses, scaling businesses. And we're really conscious, and I am really conscious to make sure that we interview a broad section of responsibilities and levels of experience as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed the episodes that we put out so far in this series. We've got a couple more for kind of season one, and then we'll be having a break, and then we'll be back later in the year with another bunch of guests. Today, I am joined by David Cuthbertson. David and I have known each other for a long time. Our relationship originally is actually through his brother, James, who actually, I'm very glad to say, was the very first person I interviewed when I started doing Source Presents. So this is a nice kind of a nice point to kind of start the conversation. David's background, we've talked loads. We've worked together, helping David to support him in some of the companies that he's worked in. But I was saying before we jumped on the call, what I find really interesting about David's journey is that he took what I believe to be probably the best route that you can take if you are early in your career and looking to build a career in sales and ideally getting into technology sales. There is a path that I believe that you probably should take to not only avoid risk, but also to learn the core fundamentals of what really good B2B sales is, and specifically then what B2B kind of software selling is, before you start to take some of those more perceived risky moves and start working with earlier stage businesses and scaling organizations. We'll come on to that. We'll talk about kind of David's background. We'll talk about some of the challenges, surprises, things that have gone wrong, things that have gone right over the course of the last few years in his career. But to begin with, I'm going to hand over to David, let him introduce himself, and just kind of talk a little bit about the kind of early stages of your career. I guess looking at when you left education and the route to getting into sales, why you wanted to get into sales, what the plan was, and where you ended up.
Sure thing. Thanks, Lloyd. And looking back at it retrospectively, it's nice for someone to say that it's the ideal, the perfect journey, because it definitely didn't feel like that at times. But no, I left the University of Bristol having done an enjoyable but practically useless biological science degree or physiology degree. And at the time, because I was late to getting on grad schemes and those kinds of professional journeys that all my friends seemed to do at the time, I was aware that you could jump into a sales job and get paid quite well if you were half decent at it. So I thought I'll jump in and try and use my degree, and went into a medical sales degree, or a medical information sales role at a company called Global Data that was not known to me at all at the time. What that taught me, that first role, was basically what I thought was going to be a glamorous sales environment. I was going to get all this coaching, and it was absolutely the opposite. It was thrown into a huge sales floor of a pretty challenging sales world and some really interesting characters, and it was a sink or swim environment of selling basically information of who's developing what drugs to universities, investors, small biotech companies, and it was really, really difficult role. But I think the great thing about that was taught me a little bit about just working really hard, and the fact that if you do just work really, really hard, eventually someone's going to buy something from you. And I was pretty determined that I wasn't going to leave that job until I was at least okay at it. So I spent a decent amount of time there, I think 19 months or so at Global Data, originally doing what is now called SDRing, but at the time was just called junior sales, calling people and hoping they'll answer the phone, and then putting them onto someone more senior on the sales floor, and then I ended up sort of doing that myself for a little while. But I worked out that I quite liked the sales side of it, but I didn't think that the medical stuff was that interesting, and it wasn't actually that useful. And at the time, a data analytics company called Tableau had just landed in Europe and set up a small office in London that they then scaled and were making a bit of noise about. And I thought I'd like to go and do that. That looks cool and very techy and owned by Seattle-based headquarters. This could be a cool jumping off point where I can go and hopefully get that shiny sales environment that I was finally looking for. So I went across to those guys, and that was a completely different chapter. Brilliant, very, very fast growing organization. That sort of unlocked the rest of my career, really, which was a great 4 years with Tableau that then eventually went public and got bought by Salesforce.
And so when you joined Tableau, how big was the business in total, and what was that London office? How big was it, and the journey that you saw of growth? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure thing. So they'd actually just just IPO'd when I joined, but it was only a small team in Europe. So maybe I think it was between 150 and 200 people tops in the whole European organisation. And our London HQ this is way before COVID, obviously, everybody was in that office, and there were teams that represented each part of the whole of EMEA, right? So we had sales teams that covered each region. And by the time that I left, 4 years later, we were about 700 people in EMEA. And I'd started then having regional heads in Paris and Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and started scaling out. So it went from what felt like a small business to a huge business in 4 years. All the while, the rest of the world is also scaling, and the US was huge.
I think most people would like to have, and now would like to find that opportunity. It's hard to find, to get those companies. Everyone talks about scaling, but in today's climate, harder than ever actually to find organizations that are on that. Everyone talks about rocket ship. We talk about it too much, but everyone's on a rocket ship apparently. But the reality is that Tableau actually were, they were, in the last 10 years, one of not that many actually who really were. Did you, when you joined or when you were looking for that role, was it obvious to you that they were going in that direction, or was it just difference to what you'd done, and actually you could see some reasonable growth and thought this is a good opportunity, but I'm not sure what I'm getting into necessarily?
Yeah, it's hard to put myself in my sort of mid-20s mindset, but I think that there's a lot of luck that it just happened to be around. And actually, the way that I came across it was when I was in my former role, we sold a product that basically was a glorified Excel spreadsheet around who's developing drugs, and our direct competitor had put all of this data into this product, which I then learnt was Tableau. And what was obvious in there, having done some statistics with my degree, is that most people can't digest reams and reams of data and reams of information, but if you put it in a visually cool tool that you can play around with it, it becomes really interesting. Nobody wants to have a look at a database, but everybody wants to have a look at visual stuff. And so what was immediately clear was the product was really cool. When they asked you to interview with it, you had to use it. So it wasn't just for techies or just for data analysts. So anybody could use it that had a laptop and an Excel sheet of information. And what I also liked about it, even at that time, was it was quite limited in my first role who I could sell what we had. The addressable market was small. Whereas for Tableau, anybody who wanted ideas or try and get some kind of trends or patterns out of a piece of data, from a small shop owner to a massive bank or whatever, that was an option to be able to sell to. And so what was amazing about that was we're just starting up in Europe. We've had a massive growth in the US. Here's all of our information. Here's all of our clients. Walgreens, the big enterprise clients in the US, and basically world's your oyster here, and you can kind of go after anybody in this in this region. So I knew there was going to be a ton of growth, and the fact they'd scaled so quickly and come over to the UK, but also the product itself I just knew was super exciting, and I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes complete sense. Did you? One of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for people earlier in their career to join larger, more established businesses is, I think if you can get the foundations of excellent training and excellent leadership, and learn from people who've really been there and done it, and had maybe the career that you envisage yourself going, the journey that you envisage yourself going on. If you can build, the same as anything in life, I guess, if you can build those foundations at the beginning, it's going to set you up pretty well for your future. Whereas conversely, maybe if you come out of education and you go to the smaller, less fast growth, but maybe just kind of riskier businesses where there's not so much rigor and process and standardization of kind of how you approach things, then it's really hard to then do that the other way around. When your time at Tableau, if you look at the learning, the way that you developed and the learning that you're exposed to, and also the leadership that you're exposed to, how much that helped you then, and how much can you look back on and realize that's been a really solid foundation to what you've done for the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think it's it can't be underplayed, that, right? That in retrospect, when I joined the organization, I worked in the commercial sales sector, right, which is the smaller end, so not the big banks and the big law firms and that kind of thing, but I think it was a $1 million turnover, so still a huge range, but you're doing lots and lots of deals, and they basically had a playbook of coaching of, you've got to do this many things in a day, in a week, in a month to be successful. And they are things like number of outreach touches, demos booked, demos completed, and that kind of thing, with an endless supply of people putting their hand up to say, I want to have a look at this. And so there's literally, to give us like a sporting analogy, it's like having just hundreds of shots at goal, and eventually, you're going to find what goes in and what works. And they were so confident in that because they'd done it in the US, then they'd done it in the UK for the whole of EMEA, to saying, if you do this every single day, week, month, you'll hit your quota and you'll be successful. Don't worry about marketing and lead gen and lead sourcing. We'll sort that all out for you. All you've got to do, we'll put the ball on the tee. You've got to kick it to the post, and just keep doing that at the rate of knots. And that was amazing, that kind of process of they built this engine that worked, and they'd also built this sales deck and the way that we demoed the product and how you close and all this kind of very, very structured training. And the onboarding was incredible for every single person that joined the org. That success, unless you really pushed against the grain, or unless you just didn't do what was being prescribed, you were successful, right? Partly that's obviously what you're doing. Most of it's because you're in a very successful engine and a brilliant product. But taking loads of that away and then putting some of that in place at other places, I think is what got me the opportunity to go somewhere else, because Tableau became so successful and well known. You go to a smaller company and they say, this guy probably knows what good looks like, and he's seen it and he's been in it. So he'll be able to replicate some of that. And B, as a youngster just getting started, to go to somewhere big like that, where you literally have so many opportunities, to mess it up, and it doesn't really matter. Whereas you go to a small Series A startup and you might only get 10 leads in a year, and all 10 need to convert, right? And so that is a really nice opportunity where at the time it feels stressful and like you've got to do every single one. But looking back, it's a numbers game, and they knew it was anyway. So they'd hired a load of salespeople to do commercial sales, and they knew they'd get loads of leads. So as long as you convert a third or half of them, great.
It's the beauty of joining a business, I guess, where, as you said earlier, everyone can use the product. So, to an extent, there's an endless supply of opportunity. So, when you look to leave, what was the plan? What were you looking for, and why?
Yeah, so I'd been in the org at a time where it was growing all the time, right? Every 2 or 3 quarters, there were kind of new teams springing up and this kind of thing. They chopped sales org into commercial and enterprise, and then they put a third structure in somewhere between the middle, and I was quite keen on like really rocketing, to some kind of heady heights, and it was growing quicker than your own progression, right? Because you're still a super youngster and you've only done 8 or 9 quarters of sales. So you can't go and run an enterprise sales team, but in your head you're thinking, well, 2 quarters ago, that would have been completely achievable. And so at that point, it very much became, and there was quite a big jumping off point of, this is now starting to feel a lot more like an enterprise software business. We're hiring people in from places like Oracle and HP and these kind of slower moving old guys that just wouldn't have fit in, even 6, 9, 12 months earlier. And there's all these other things that you've got to go and do and prove to be able to jump into a leadership position. And that's what I wanted to do ultimately. And again, it was one of these things with the beauty of hindsight. That's completely the right decision for the organization. And I couldn't just sit in the seat and say, I'm just going to be an IC and continue to do sales. I want to see if I can go and take this somewhere else. There's also an element of, all of this stuff has gone really well and it's been brilliant. But if there was somebody else sitting in this seat with the same set of accounts or the same set territory, would they probably have done something almost exactly the same and been as successful? I was thinking probably yes. And so then the question is, can you take what you know and go to somewhere that no one's ever heard of, pretty much, and make a like kind of market difference? So there were those 2 things. I wanted to start managing people and sort of making decisions for an organization, and I did have a little bit of, if you stay here much longer, much like a sort of domesticated cat, are you going to forget how to go and and hunt stuff in the street? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I'm just I've not yet spoken to anybody in 2 years on this interview series who's referenced domesticated cats. Wow. But it's
it was only a matter of time, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
The really interesting point that for me that you raised there, that you summarised it really well, and I interview a lot of candidates who I think were in your position when you made the decision to leave Tableau, who are frustrated with the opportunity to take the next leap again. And you framed it really, especially when you're in a business that is growing that fast, and you explained it really well, because what you said was that the development of the business is quicker than the development of you. So you're not ready to lead that enterprise team or take that leadership responsibility, because you're just not equipped for doing that. So from a business perspective, it makes so much sense. But that is a fundamental reason for a lot of people leaving those types of roles. And I have conversations with them where you kind of outside looking in, you're like, why are you leaving? Because this business is growing fast. You're smashing it. You're earning incredibly well. You're getting a lot of opportunity. And yet there's this desire to try and take the next step and the next step. And there is a part of me that thinks that, and it exists not just in SaaS, by the way, like it exists. I've seen it exist in recruitment companies, especially smaller companies, where the only way to get progression is to take leadership roles. So you're always striving to run a team. And the reality is, you look back at it and you go, well, you were never equipped to be able to run a team. That wasn't the best business decision. So I've seen the flip side of it. But I do think there's a short-termism that a lot of people have, and I'll say, like, in their 20s maybe, where they're just learning how to become a really good IC. And I'm not saying that you. What I'm interested to understand is, my point, and what I'm interested to understand is, if you'd have stayed, do you think there would have been further opportunities for you to develop your experience as an IC that could have made you an even better leader today?
Yes, 100%. I think that the short-termism is really common, and I think because unlike if you compare the sales track to, let's say, for want of something really interesting, something like audit at the Big Four, which is it literally is mapped out from day one to day wherever X. Every single promotion that you get is completely clear, and so you just stay on the escalator and then punch your card. And I'm probably oversimplifying it. I'm sure someone will say, it's not like that, but it pretty much is like that, right? And so you have to then say, this isn't really clear, and also there's nobody in that senior position who's 50, 60, apart from they're the person that you're trying to get the promotion off, who doesn't want to basically mentor and manage you at the same time, to tell you, look, if you just keep your head down, you're going to be able to do all these kind of things. And that there are things that my really, really close friends that stayed at Tableau and have done really well, or stayed in similar types of orgs have done really well, that now, you know, they can do things that the door for that for me right now is probably closed, and probably will stay closed unless I go and be an IC. You know, I've never sold to a major bank like that, and managed one or two major enterprise customers. So the idea of, you know, at one point being a CRO for a major company is off the table, right? Because I haven't covered that spectrum of IC roles. So the idea of going and leading that team or leading an org that does that is impossible, right? So they're the sort of things that you don't think of when you're saying, like, I want to go because I'm brilliant, and, you know, give me the opportunity or I'm out of here. And it is short-termism. And the other thing that people don't address straight away is that there is an element of your success which is dictated by you, but the large amount of it is the situation you put yourself in, the team, the company, the product you're selling. And some people can understand that, like you and I and other people, but some people genuinely believe that they are the reason that they're successful entirely. Yeah. And that for me is hilarious. So there are some people that say, I know I'm not the sole reason, but I'd like to progress. And other people say, I'm leaving because I'm the reason that Tableau IPO'd. And that it really makes me laugh. They're the people that you want to watch out for.
I mean, I've spoken to a few of those people over the years, that's for sure. So, I mean, it's easy. It's easy now to look back on hindsight, but I think also at that point you obviously made the decision that you wanted to go and test yourself, to utilize all that knowledge and that experience in a smaller, more just different environment. You joined Arctic Shores. Can you talk a little bit about the journey of that? You know, there, what you did, what you achieved, the roles that you had.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I at that time I wanted to have a look at all the use cases that we'd sold to for Tableau. What was amazing is all decisions around people were so unbelievably non-data centric. So we would get 7 or 8 leads from businesses a day, to follow up on, and all the ones around HR and who we hire or talent recruiting. There was never any data. All the stuff around finance and sales were all very data centric, and decision making very data centric. And so when I heard that a friend or a contact of ours was looking for someone to start their sales team in earnest after they'd secured a Series A, it was all around psychometrics data. So why do people behave like they do, and which personality types are good for which roles, helping large companies hire the right people into engineering firms or accounting, consultancy, those kinds of things. And so I thought, brilliant. I know that the data here will be a big play, and someone bringing data-centric decision-making into HR is an open door, because I've seen it, from glances at Tableau. And I think I've got enough exposure to be able to build a kind of demand gen engine, albeit on the shoestring budget and really small, and be able to go and cherry pick some customers with with a bit of a budget and some SDRs around me. This is my chance to go and do that. So I went and joined Arctic Shores, which was a brilliant company, and with some really smart data scientists and some behavioral psychologists all mixed into one. And they were a bit confused what I was supposed to be doing when I turned up. And I said, I'm actually hoping to sell some of this to somebody, because it did feel a bit like a university research project when I started. But yeah, it was a great leap, and working for the founder and the CEO, Robert, at the time was wonderful, wonderful jump into small VC-backed startups. And that was 2017, when there was a lot of VC money, there's a lot of opportunity for startups, and the market was really promising, right? So at that time, I thought this is going to be a great move.
Yeah. What did you, when you look at the things that you brought with you from Tableau, skills, experience, knowledge, what are some of the things that you brought with you that worked incredibly well? And what are some of the things that you kind of brought with you that actually really didn't work at all?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think the stuff that I've brought with me that worked really well and still kind of works really well everywhere is this there's that kind of sales methodology of exactly how you do sales. And
Yeah.
it was very juxtaposed because obviously I was working directly for a founder who was
Yeah.
telling his story about how he'd created this wonderful business, which is great. But you can only do, the only person who can sell like that is the founder, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't repeat that. So building a methodology of this is how we do discovery, these are the kind of questions we ask, this is how we do a demo, this is how we demo the product, these are the things that we show the customer, this is how we then move that through the funnel, and this is the way we qualify deals and move them through. So that what I picked up at Tableau, which was like completely a completely fixed thing. It wasn't up for debate. That's how it's done, and that allowed you to be able to take that process and put it somewhere else, anywhere else actually, it turns out, and it works really well. So that was great.
Yeah.
Some of the other stuff that didn't quite work so well is what I thought, like demand gen and creating an engine for interest was going to be really easy.
Yeah.
Turns out that's really hard. And so, obviously I had that, I understood the tools that our marketing teams had used, and I understood what the marketing content would look like and trials and those kinds of things. But putting it all together and having actually somebody run that and drive demand gen so that there are inbound leads and inbound interest is an extraordinarily big operation that takes a lot of resource and a lot of time. And so that did not work. So then I had to resort to going back to the sort of global data style. I've just got to go and ignore it. There's no other help. It's just you and the phone and the internet, and try and make connections and do that. And so that was great. And that's at the point where I look back to my first role and thought, thank God I'd done that. Otherwise, I might be a bit snookered here.
Did you find that it was hard to manage the expectations of a founder who maybe didn't quite know what you were doing?
Yeah, I think that's jumping in and working for a founder for the first time. I think is really hard because they're really interesting characters. Is the first thing, and you'll know, obviously, having worked with tons already, right? They are really energetic, really enthusiastic, but move at a pace, and they want everything to be in the way that they envisage it. And so when there's a process that you're used to working for a sales manager who works for a sales director who works for a CRO, so it's just a whole hierarchy of salespeople all understand things like a good win ratio of deals like in the pipeline to close is 33%, and better than that is great. So working for a founder and saying that was just like, nope, we want to close all the deals that come in. So that's a really interesting thing. And there are moments in that time where you're like, this is not how that works. The other time, obviously, is, I'll say, have we done the discovery? So, no, I've just sent a proposal. What for? Well, what do you mean? And so, but again, because I had this quite rigid structure of what I would do and how I would sell, working in an unstructured environment for the first time took a little while to get used to that the founders will do things as they please. It's their business. And so there's an element of having to work with a founder, but then also hire people under you to say, this is how we're going to do it. And what's going to happen is the founder's going to jump in, they're going to do some brilliant stuff, which is going to be really valuable. But you can't copy that. They're the only person that can swim like that in the pool. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that was
it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I think it's so hard for founders to... A lot of the conversations I have, certainly nowadays with founders, are talking about the challenges of hiring their first commercial talent, and how... I spoke to somebody yesterday who basically said, I need all of these characteristics, basically someone like me. and said exactly that line, basically someone like me. And so we went on and we talked about the role and the requirements and the expectations, and I circled back to that point. I said, my only concern is, like, I think I understand what you're looking to do. I understand the audience. I get that. I can picture what the type of person looks like that you're looking to hire. And these will be their first two commercial hires. So I understand the importance of getting these right. But I am scared by the line, I need someone like me, because first of all, I don't think you need someone like you. And first of all, if you think it's easy to find people like you, it's really not. So I need to manage your expectations on that front, and I find that it's a consistent thing.
Yeah, there's also an element of, and this is definitely true, that in the early startup space with founders is if we hire a salesperson, we'll start selling the product, and that's brilliant, right? Much like, if we get a battery for this product, it'll work, and it's not the case, right? Not always the case. And what's really interesting is, there are really important things that I worked with a great guy called Pete Crosby whilst I was at Arctic Shores, and he was a kind of mentor for me whilst I was in that new sales leadership role for the first time.
Yep.
And things like the importance of actually really understanding like your total addressable market and your ICP and why your product is absolutely essential for that person you're speaking to at that time in that market, and and those kinds of things are really important. And what I think often happens is early stage businesses have some early success and they get one or two clients, and they might be really exciting clients, and we go, brilliant, we have cracked it. We need to pour petrol in this engine, get a few salespeople, because the money's out there and it's on the table, and we're leaving it on there if we don't hire salespeople immediately. And I think what often happens is salespeople come in and then say, actually, these guys didn't want it for these reasons, and we need to actually have a look at refining what we're building. And that feedback loop is not welcome at the start often. They're like, we've got product people for that. Your job is to go and actually sell. And what I think people realise as they go through that journey is the sales folks are also have a role, a really, really important role of feeding back. This is why that's not worked out. This is why they didn't go for that. This is why they didn't jump on and sign for this reason, so that the product team can take that on board and we can build that into strategy. So those things are definitely true, I think, of that kind of pre-Series A, Series A stage.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. And I think, just referencing somebody like Pete Crosby, I don't personally know, but I know lots of people who've benefited from his knowledge and experience. So that says something about the business that you join. I think if they're spending some time investing in that support for you, it's a good indicator, I think, within companies. The leadership that you had during your time at Arctic Shores. Yeah. So I know that at periods, and you'll have to kind of, I'd love to give some more detail, but you had this relationship when you joined, I think, where it was you reporting to Robert. That's but right. Then there was over time leadership that came in between that, and I'd love to get a bit more detail on that. And I think also the point I'd like to raise is that sometimes people find that, and maybe you did also find that quite difficult at first, because if you've had that relationship direct and then suddenly someone's in between it, and you might feel, I've definitely spoken to candidates in the past who felt like that was their role. They were going into that role, and they can't. Again, it comes back to, I guess, what we were talking about earlier, that thing of recognizing where you're at and your skill level within the growth of the business and what's required, and actually, are you the right person? But can you kind of go into a little detail around the leadership that you had and how that changed and how that developed your experience as well?
Yeah, totally. So I went in originally and directly reported into Robert. And again, coming from a structure where everything was really clear to it all being quite fluid was quite new. After a couple of years of reporting into Robert and building a team of junior salespeople and account managers, we decided to merge the international side, which is what I looked after, with the UK side, which a colleague of mine looked after. And at that point, I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to get the job that looks after the whole thing, the kind of CRO style role, which wasn't to be. And at the time, I was furious about that, because I thought, I've actually done the best job here, and so bringing someone else external is going to be really expensive. It sit between me and Robert. It's just going to slow things down. And I couldn't have been more wrong about that, and very happy to admit that. And I think at the time we had a new chairman of the board, a guy called Adam Hale, who came from Fair Sales. Really again, a really nice guy. Worked really closely with Robert, and really, really good strategic advisor to our business as the chairman of the board. And I think he said, look, you need someone who's done this before from an early stage startup, but also understands what the people underneath need. And so so he brought in an interim CRO called Carly Fordham. Carly was brilliant, and she'd come from a business information in the early 2000s kind of background, but she did really well to kind of shoulder some of the responsibility that came from Robert and the board to allow me and the people that worked under me just to get on with what we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But also had bandwidth because she wasn't directly looking after accounts to do some of the coaching and things like that. Because all the time I was there, I was like a player manager, right? So I'm always owning accounts and doing sales, but also trying to coach people, and that's the hardest job in the world, is trying to do both. And so Carly was brilliant, a really calming presence to be able to see the wood for the trees and understand what we needed to get good at. And so working under her was really, really good, and something that I didn't think I needed at the time, but I definitely did. And picking up things from her style. And how she was able to work with Robert and get him to understand what we thought the team needed was really interesting. So that was an interesting play. And the other person I worked under, who was also in for an interim role for CRO, is a lady called Margot, who she'd come from Experian, and she'd worked there for 10-15 years, and then she'd worked as an interim CRO at a number of startups. And so she was great. Again, different style of either Carly, but we were doing lots and lots of things, and what she was excellent at doing is just cutting away a loads of noise. Like, let's just focus on a handful of regions, a handful of accounts. Let's try not to do all this stuff, and let's just, what she got right in the weeds with all of us, and about let's just do these things well, and we'll see our win rates increase. We saw our average order value increase, and also she's just one of these kind of sales leaders who are just really experienced at bringing that level of, it's going to be all right, guys, like, we're in a good spot. Don't panic. Because there was a bit of everyone looking at everybody else being like, what's going on here, and because I wasn't in a leadership role, I was again pretty much like an IC at that point. So yeah, very good, really good strategic moves to bring them in, and also as an aspiring sales leader, learning off those people so you can cherry pick what you do and don't like off them is really, really key.
I think the You're absolutely right, and I think that one of my somebody in my network who I know well, who as you know, we're doing more fractional work. That's a service that something that we're working on. But I just see a huge amount of value in lots of different scenarios. But the experience, so the reference point that someone in my network uses, who's really been there and done it, is battle scars, and they talk about kind of having just having those battle scars, and you can have somebody who's exceptional in a leadership role, who's really helping to scale and grow the business, but if they've only ever seen good and not bad, and they've not been through real challenging times, then that can also be quite hard. Because if someone's just had, and you do meet people, I meet people who've just had a kind of growth trajectory, which is just success on success on success. So they've picked the right business, the right product, the right leadership team, and they get to a point where something goes wrong, or the market changes, or they choose badly. And I think that's where a fractional interim revenue leader can just be so valuable for a business. It's not necessarily, it's just about that calmness that comes with experience, and the ability to be able to say, look, I've been here before, I've seen this, we're okay, this is the plan.
I think what was really good, and that's definitely true, and I'll talk about what it was like for me in role, because again, these two people, blessed, who came in to work with a disgruntled me who thought I should be doing what they're doing, and that can't have been a fun thing to do, like a red rag to a bull. But they gave me space as a senior person in the team to say, look, what we need from you and what the business needs from you is to go and do these things, to go and do them really well. Tell us what resource you need or who you need in your small team, and go and do them. And we'll give you the support and we'll give you the space to do it. And we'll explain what's going on to the business, that's what you're doing. And then with the rest of the team was, let me help you do exactly the things you need to do, and we can everything else. So for each of the people that reported into those fractional leaders, our lives became way more simple, but also there was an element of calm and of, we're doing the right things, we're on the right track, we just need to change a couple of things to get there. That was really useful. What I don't know this for sure, but I'm relatively convinced that this is also the case in the other direction, to say to the board and to the executive team, this team is not wrong. We're not driving, we're not barking at the wrong tree here. We just need to have a couple of changes. These are the changes I'm making. This is how long it's going to take. This is going to be successful, and this is when you'll see the changes. And knowing those characters, they will have done that, and also both of them will have had that desired effect. And so, what I think that means for the executive team or the CEO, whoever it is that's running that team, is they have one point of contact that is confident, that has the reliability to allow that person to then go, okay, that's sorted. I can now go and focus on the other thing I need to go and get done, or the other 4 or 5 things, rather than try and manage 7, sales and marketing and, revenue ops leads or whatever. That is all well-intentioned, but don't have the ability to say, don't worry, I've got this. I know what's going to happen. This is the plan. This is what the outcome.
And I think that point is so valid, because I think that if you look at maybe where companies do get this wrong, in that scenario that you just talked about, with you at your stage of development, years of experience, responsibility, a lot of companies might be inclined to go and find somebody who's just a bit more experienced than you. So doesn't insert the job title, sales director, VP of sales, but not necessarily that much more experience, but it's just maybe has done it once more than you. Let's say, just as an example. And I think that's where a problem occurs, because what happens is, and it's the same in any walk of life actually, when you meet somebody who really has had that depth and years of experience, they have such confidence in their abilities that it's not about coming in and changing it all. It's about, you're actually paying somebody probably to just do what seem like fairly small things, but they're very simple but clear decisions. Whereas what I think can happen is that if you don't hire somebody who has enough experience, then the urge is to come in and go, right, this isn't working. Let's change it all. And I think that's what. It's quite simply, you're buying that experience. You're buying that, the knowledge that person really has lived and breathed all of the challenges that you're going through, probably 3, 4, 5 times over in their career already.
And in those teams, there's almost always the people that are actually at the at the coalface doing the role. They've got experience of they know the product, they'll know the demo, they'll know the customer base, right? So there's some really good stuff you've got to work with there. And often those people, turn over or leave because it's not a great experience. And what you need is that person to come in, that fractional leader to come in. And in both those cases, for both those fractional leaders that I talked about, they weren't 5 days a week. They don't need to be there with you. One was completely remote, and neither were 5 days a week, right? Because they're there to say.
What was that like?
Brilliant. Because the directives on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or I think one of them was 3.5 days a week, was we know what we've got to do. The sessions we have with them is, how is this going? What's happening next? Like the simple things that we've talked about. Where are you with them? What do you need help on? The in between days is you can just go and get that done, right? And it makes that really simple. And so for the business, obviously they're not paying someone. Yes, they're paying for far more experience and much more expense, but it's only at 2, 3, 4 days a week. And then you've got your more junior folks that know the product inside out and that own the accounts to actually go and do the delivery, which works really nicely. So you've got these days where it's on and you're sort of feeding back and coaching and working on it, and then these other days where you're actually delivering, which worked really well.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. I think it's not something I need to know the answer to that question, because I think that hopefully we're going to be working with more fractional leaders, and I think it's very easy to see it from the fractional leader or the founder's perspective. But actually, if you are going into a small team, how does that feel when that person's not there all the time? But it makes sense. I think, again, actually, just going back to the same point I just made, get somebody experienced enough, they'll know when to give someone the time and the space and the opportunity to just go out there and deliver, rather than, I think, probably somebody who's less confident, less experienced, feels like they've got to be closer to the action all the time without. And again, I'm standardizing that. I know there are plenty of examples where that's not the case, but no, That makes sense. So moving forward, you look to leave Arctic Shores, and then you join a business called Tempo. Now, I think I'm right in saying that when you joined Tempo, they were at an earlier stage than Arctic Shores. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they were both actually Series A, but when I joined Arctic Shores, the Series A had just landed, whereas when I joined Tempo, the Series A had been 2 years previous.
Okay.
And they're all those similar sizes. There was 2 years of distance between that in Tempo.
And so at Tempo, what were you going into, and what I guess what was the job? What did you find when you arrived, and what was the objective?
Yeah, so what I went into there was they wanted someone who's a kind of commercial director to come in and manage a team of folks that was going to be selling a job matching platform in the London startup market. So how do we connect scaling startups with youngsters coming out of university that want to get into sales, marketing, BD, SDRing, those kinds of roles, CSMs. Yeah. And I thought to myself, look, that there's a data play there. There's a tech marketplace element that I'd worked similar for Tempo, and it's still along the line of humans getting their next step in their career. So for Arctic Shores, it was out of university into roles. This Tempo was similar. And there's two young founders. I really like the idea of working with people that are a similar kind of age and stage as me, and in a localized market with London and loads of tech money and loads of VC money that I knew we could get a result from. So I went into that thinking this is going to be great. What was the real challenge there was we built an SDR team, an SDR engine, we built a sales team, but post-COVID, the recovery that we thought would be almost immediate, or at least there, took so much longer for organizations, and still we're the 6th of March 2025, right, and we're still not at that point where small businesses need a number of salespeople or a number of junior people in a commercial role, and organizations have found ways of doing it in a different style. And so the model that they built pre-COVID that I've been talking to them about for about a year just didn't translate into that post-COVID world at all, and it was a very, very difficult struggle to get that business up and moving with the folks that we'd hired.
The theme though is, and I think it's important to talk about that, because often you can have these conversations, and it can be often I have these conversations, and I'm keen to talk about all the things that have gone well and the experiences that you've had, but it's also important to say this is bloody hard. This is not easy. The easy route we talked about 25 minutes ago, not easy, that's hard to, you know what I'm saying. I think easy was staying at Tableau. That was easy at the time, and people have done that and had fantastic careers. We both know that. Arctic Shores, not easy, but success and growth and huge amounts learned. And then Tempo, just I think from knowing you and talking to you quite quickly, was really hard.
Yeah,
and was a real challenge the whole time.
Really hard, a huge challenge, and not one that that if I had known what that was going to be like, I would have obviously dodged, right? But again, in retrospect, brilliant. Just because you've got to sort of learn and know yourself that just because you desperately want the next step up in your career and you think that's what that looks like, is that you shouldn't jump for the first thing, and it can be really hard. What was great is some of the things I did there that I wouldn't have done if I wouldn't have been able to do that, which is basically step into almost like HR operational style roles where we had to do two restructures and those kinds of things that you, with no experience at all, having to do, which look was not fun, and I wouldn't want to do it again in a rush. But having done that, and again, that's quite a deep battle scar. It's another thing that you can just stick on all the things that you've done. If there's an A to Z, what have you done? Well, that's one of them. And it's great to say these things are hard. it was also in that stage where we were hiring people that wanted to come into tech because they thought tech was cool and fun and easy and successful, and it's all Google and everyone gets free food and drinks. And we're finding out now, I think we're coming out at the end of this journey, that it's not easy. Like, going into a tech startup is not easy. Going to work for Amazon or Google and stuff might be it, but that's a completely different thing. Going into a Series A, Series B company that works out of a WeWork and you've got a laptop and massive expectations is not easy. And if you're not the kind of person who wants to say, I'm going to really dig in and make this work and make it a success, you shouldn't do it.
End of conversation.
That's it. That's it. End of podcast. Hard stop.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I think, and whether those kind of pre-COVID times come back or not, no one knows. You can speculate. It's probably no time soon. That's for sure. But I think that the experience and knowledge that you've gleaned, as I said at the beginning, of working across different businesses, when you talk to people and you talk about their career, you realise that what you've crammed in so far. We've not even talked about what you're doing now, which we'll do in a minute. But what you've crammed in, and you are mid-30s of a career that most people are going to work for a good chunk longer. That's for sure. There's a lot there, right? And so. And that's all valuable. Talking about where you are now, you're currently leading things commercially at Unibody. Again, people-orientated business, people and technology. And what I'd love to understand about that role, but also that journey, is that it seems to me that you've stumbled on something that you actually have a genuine interest for, and you would stay in it otherwise. And I don't think enough people early on in their career they just think, I'm going to join a software company, I'm going to join a SaaS business, I just want to make money. And I get that, but I think quite quickly you get to a point where you go, actually, I'm not interested in that. I'm having conversations with people every day that the people I'm speaking to, I don't find interesting. I don't find the product interesting. It's not, and that directly impacts the ability to enjoy what you do, obviously, but also to perform as well. And it's the same in my job. I love doing go-to-market, anything within the kind of sales and marketing space, because the people that I speak to I find interesting. I enjoy it deeply. If I was placing something else into an audience where there was maybe less opportunity to build relationships, I'd find that incredibly hard. But you found this, and so what is it that you enjoy so much about being in that space? And now, if you look at where you are today, working at Unibody, what are you doing, and what are you loving about that?
Yeah, I think talking about the space first, I still think it's really interesting that because I had a relatively rudderless journey into my first role, like almost everybody else does, or lots of people seem to, apart from the folks that come from a family that know exactly what's going on because they've been in this world for generations. I think that young people need so much help, and there's so much noise out there that if we can use tech to help people properly, whether that be the psychometric sign from the Arctic Shores space, or matching like we were trying to do at Tempo, or making sure people start at university and choose a degree properly and the place to study properly with informed information, use tech to help that, great. So I find that really interesting. How can we leverage tech to help youngsters get into a place where they're actually going to be successful? And it's something everyone can understand, like data process mining or all that kind of stuff. It baffles me. So the idea of going in and trying to learn about that and then sell that, I think, would be dreaded. And what really attracted me to Unibody is that it's going great guns. It's a Series B company, so it's obviously a little bit further on than the previous two were. But what was great here is I come in to manage a UK and European region with an AM team that are like junior but developing, and also work with a really passionate founder in Diego, but not directly, because I have a very, very well seasoned CRO on the East Coast in the US called Eric Rosenthal. And what I really wanted from this role was that I lacked in the previous two, is to learn from somebody who's built and scaled software companies for successful exits and done that 2 or 3 or 4 times in their career, whilst also continuing my own development in this kind of earlier stage business. And I have, both of those things, which I'm really, really fortunate and really happy with in this role, which is great. So I have that energy and freedom and ability to do my own thing. At the same time, bounce ideas and work with and work for a CRO who knows what good looks like and is really, really, really vocal about that. And work really closely with the CEO who's very, very aspirational and ambitious, and those things are perfect.
How do you find working with a CRO who's based over in the US?
Good. He's in terms of we don't get like FaceTime, right? But in terms of I think in terms of working with the US team, and I also have some very good peers in the US, is that they have a very positive influx on us. They have a positive influence on our working style. They're very, very keen on being results driven. They really want to win, and also in their mind that not a good job or tried hard is sort of not really good enough. And because we have a French founder, and we have and we work in the HE space, we sometimes have it's easier to not push hard for things than it would be to actually ruffle feathers and get them done. And so it's a really nice balance of we like to think we probably have a positive influence on them as well, but it's great, because the other thing about leaving a large organization, right, and going to work for a small one is you have to be self-monitored, because if you're not going to, very rarely has the CEO got time to sort of like look at your sales pipeline, for example. So if you're self-driven, great, but if you've got an ability to stray from the path, someone like a very well tenured CRO is going to be there to make sure that you're doing all the things that you should be, and making sure that you're making your team do what they should be doing as well, which is really, really exciting. That's the other bit, is starting to see what second line management looks like done really well.
I think working, I had the experience earlier in my career of working for an American CEO and an American team, albeit they were actually based in the UK, but we got a lot of exposure to what was going on in the American teams and training and development courses. So much of the training was done by the US, because the business was founded in the US, a company called Reach Local. But I have never experienced anything like working under a US sales leadership and CEOs. But people, when I talk about kind of levels of ambition and that attitude of I love that point around kind of we did a good job. Well, actually, no, that's not. Did
you?
Great story.
Yeah, it doesn't look like here you did a good job.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I learned. I was there for 18 months, and I went back into recruitment because I think for me, actually, I realised that recruitment was the industry that I really enjoyed, and I joined the right businesses in some respects and the wrong business in others, in that we were selling to kind of local companies, very SME focused. And I had fortunately, my background had been recruiting for large brands. But the point is that my CEO was a guy called John Mazer, and he'd come from Wall Street. He was a banker on Wall Street, and then got into the internet and actually launched AOL in the UK. And he was incredible. Like, absolutely incredible. He put the fear of God into you, but in a way where everybody loved him. He was absolutely crazy. But he had this ability to just kind of like hold your feet on the flames and make sure that you were delivering, but also whilst you just thought he was just the nicest person ever. Yet there's a healthy level of respect, but also you were pretty shit scared of him as well. So I'm not saying for a second that's your experience. I'm just oversharing on my end. But I do think it's interesting working for either a US businesses or reporting to somebody who is a a leader who's grown up working in software in the US, because it's different.
Yeah, and I think that also if again, like coming back to the Tableau, the sort of the gift that keeps giving, right? As I know what that personality is like, and I know
Yeah,
what that American sales leader personality expects, and how they communicate and those kinds of things. And I think that if I had, for example, just got to the same place, but instead of being at Tableau, I just worked at other small startups and kind of made it my own, I think that this stage now would be really jarring. And I think also they're really similar to the way that the VCs, because I had quite a lot of board exposure at Tempo, work as well, right? So it's really helped that stage, because I know what to expect. I know how that communication style is going to be, and I don't think that I would have had that if I'd have just worked in small Series A and B companies and it got to this point. I think I'd be like, who's this guy? Well, why is he speaking to me like this? But that's how it works.
I love to leave the conversation, because we've been talking for an hour, and it's been one of the easiest conversations I've had doing these. Which is not to say that the others aren't easy for those listening, but we've covered loads, albeit whilst just talking about your career, but covering lots of really important things that I think a lot of people have faced or will face. I'd love to leave these things on a really kind of like positive note. If you reflect back on where you are, still, I said earlier, still at a fairly early stage in your career, but all of the things that you've covered, the jobs, what's the one thing that you feel that you've got that has gone like so well, that you've got really, really right so far in your career?
This is going to sound like relatively sort of vague, but I don't think that I've ever thought of myself as like the finished product, right? I've never thought, because I was a good IC. I wasn't excellent. I was never, like an absolute world beater. I've never thought that I know everything about this. I know everything about this space or selling or startups or whatever. And so I've always thought, and I know that the in vogue term is kind of growth mindset. I wouldn't say that I do that and read all the books that as soon as they come out that everyone's talking about on LinkedIn, but I'm very, very aware that there's still more to learn and that there's more ways of doing things, and you don't know everything. And I think that level of sort of being smart but also being humble about the fact that you don't know those things means that you don't get blindsided by things that that don't go your way. So that it's probably a mindset thing, but I think that has allowed me to capitalize on things that have gone really well, be humble enough to know that it's there's more stuff to learn, and also be level-headed in when things haven't gone well, put that down to experience and look, you weren't to know about this, and now you do. So move on and try not to make that mistake again next time. I think that level of level-headedness has been helpful. Amazing.
David, thank you so much. That's genuinely one of the easiest hours I'll spend this year doing these, that's for sure. We've covered loads. There'll be some good clips there'll be some great clips that go out, and just thank you. Appreciate you giving your time and doing this with me. It's been great.
Thanks, Lloyd. Really appreciate it.